Okay, we are on. Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to India Game Changer. Today we are joined by Dr. Arbinder Singal, a co-founder and the CEO at Fitterfly. Arbinder, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today, by the way?
Oh, it's a fantastic morning here in India.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Awesome. Did you get a chance to run today or do any exercise?
much. Actually, I sprained my back 3 days back, so I'm
Oh,
nursing a
no.
bad back.
Oh, no.
But I'll be fine. I'll be fine in 2 days.
I'm sure you will be. But I'll tell you this, I've been traveling a lot recently, right? I was in Japan for a month, and I just got back, and whenever I come back, like my exercise regimen just kind of gets out of kilter. It kind of takes me like a few days just to get back into this idea of, okay, I need to wake up and do that thing and then eat better and stuff like that. Because when I'm away, I just find it so hard. I'm good, but I'm not great. Anyway, before we get into the central part of this conversation, can you give our listeners a bit of your background for some context?
Great. So I trained like a doctor. I did my MBBS, which is graduate medical school from Maulana Azad Medical College, which is number two in India. Then I did my master's in surgery and master's in pediatric surgery from All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi. That's incidentally number one medical school in India,
Good for you.
and there's only one seat every year, so pretty prized
Oh, wow.
thing to get. And then I went to US and trained in pediatric urology at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Came back in 2006 to India, and me and my wife decided to move to Bombay, a new city. So since I didn't have much of surgical practice in the beginning, while I was building surgical practice, I started experimenting with coding and technology, set up my first startup and a hospital. The startup got acquired, the hospital got acquired. I've been last 6 years. I've been busy building Fitterfly, which is a digital therapeutics company. But side by side, I've been practicing 1.5 days, about 15 hours a week, just to make sure that one is that I impact some people, some children, and second is pass on the surgical skills to the next generation.
Yeah, fair enough. What got you interested in pediatric surgery from the beginning? Is your family a family of doctors and they were doing that already, or something you decided on your own?
I'm the first generation doctor in the family. My dad was a teacher. So when I was growing up, I grew up in actually very small town in North Punjab, and the only two options available was to become an engineer or to become a doctor. Since I didn't like maths, I became a doctor. And when I was doing my graduate medical school, I thought that I'll take up medicine. But during my internship in surgery, I could see the immediate impact of a good surgery,
Yeah.
a clear outcome which is there in like 3 days. And then when I was posted in pediatrics, I loved working with children and the way they heal, the way they interact with doctors. And I just wanted to combine these two and become a pediatric surgeon.
What was your training like in the United States? Like how was that different than what you're doing in India, and why did you go do that?
So in India at that time, pediatric surgery was the maximum highest degree you could get. But
Okay.
I could clearly see that in pediatric surgery, you end up doing surgeries on intestine, on liver, on chest, on plastic surgery, and urology. And I thought that it is too diverse a field to keep track in terms of good quality of surgery, the publications, the research, or even having the best in class outcomes. So I wanted to focus on just urology, and that training was not available in India. So I wrote to a couple of professors in US that I'm an international fellow. I want to come and spend time and just focus on one thing. And
Right.
I think that just focus and dedicated training in one subspecialty of pediatric surgery is what I really wanted to do, and that was not available in India at that time.
Was there a pull? What's the right word? Was there a temptation to stay in the United States when you were there, or was it always the plan you and your family were just going to come back to India and settle there?
I always wanted to come back because the culture, the people. I wanted to be back in India, but later on in 2009, my wife went to Stanford for a business school MBA,
Right.
and at that time there was a lot of temptation because she was getting good job offers. Plus, I didn't wanted to stay away from her for 2 years. So those 2 years got tempted twice. I interviewed also, but then when I put the life in a nutshell, I said I want to go back to India.
I mean, one of the stories that I'm trying to tell, there's a lot to unpack here, but one of the stories that I'm trying to tell, right, is that there's this generational change that I've heard about in India, right, where educated couples like you and your wife would go to the United States or go abroad, right? It could be Australia, it could be the UK, continue your education and then stay in that place where job opportunities seemed like they were great. And yet, I think a lot of people are making the choice that you're making now as well, which is, you know what? We're coming home because the
Yeah.
opportunity there is not just good, it's unbelievably good. And we can have an impact there as well. Is that fair?
That is fair. And also, I think at a certain stage in life, like we went pretty later on in our lives,
Right.
like once we had already relationship, some kind of social standing, some kind of income guarantee here. So at that stage, I think your comparison becomes very different versus when you go for a like a high school or a early
Yeah.
on in life,
Yeah.
and your culture gets built there. So yeah.
Let me share a little bit of my own experience with you to see if it resonates at all. When I first moved to Japan in 1990, I would say once a year, my parents would ask me, "When are you coming home?" Right? Nobody really took the fact that I was there seriously in a way. And after about 5 years, I started answering the question in a different way. That answer was, I am home. And once it felt like that to me, I felt like, and I haven't gone back to the United States to live for 30 something years. And once that happened, I felt like I can't go back. Not physically can't, but just like you said, I'd built all my connections. I'd learned all of this sort of nuanced and interesting information, and I didn't want to give it up and start over again. Yeah. Anyway,
Makes sense. Makes sense. Me and my wife keep talking about that. Can we become international nomads at certain point in our times where you stay is doesn't really decide what you do?
yeah,
That we have been discussing, and we are open to that change. But right now, India is home. India is what gives us the maximum impact and maximum opportunity and happiness in personal relationships. So those three things triangulate out here.
I completely understand because I'm thinking about that as well. Now that I've really established my base here, I've lived in this region for longer than I've lived anywhere else, to be fair. But now I think about maybe I want to spend a little bit of the summer in France and work there as well, right? It's not for vacation. I don't do vacations like that. But anyway, we started a conversation offline. I want to continue it online. I was trying to make this equivalency between science, and I think scientists actually make great entrepreneurs. I'll give you my theory on this. There's so much noise in the startup space around you have to fail first before you learn anything. And people have a hard time dealing with failure. But I feel like scientists, that's their day to day life. I have a hypothesis, I have to test that hypothesis, and then I fail. If I don't fail, I'm surprised, right? As a scientist, because you're like, I'm not that smart. I'm pretty smart, but I'm not that smart. Is there an equivalency between that and the startup world? Is that fair as well?
If you look at the life cycle of a startup, 100 companies set up and only five of them reach a Series A level, and only two or three of them make really big.
Right.
And even if you're being successful, just like a Google graveyard, you'll have your own graveyard of experiments.
Right.
We at Fitterfly certainly, pivoted twice, like complete change in business model, complete change in product, complete change in market. Sometimes people keep talking about failure is just a learning, but I don't think that is true. When you're in the middle of that failure, it's really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
You start having a lot of self doubts, and you really need something to carry on to see it as a learning. At that time, it doesn't sound like a learning, but you're absolutely right. I think startup is all about understanding the anatomy of a failure and then learning from it and moving on to the next experiment
Yeah.
till you find the right thing to do.
And do you see an equivalency between the stuff? Because you said this too, like you do still practice, what do you say, 1.5 days a week? In a way, it's
Yeah,
just to keep it's just to keep that muscle memory going, but also to have impact, right? Because you can see that impact immediately. How do you transfer that feeling, right? Because building a company from scratch is kind of a longer game, if that makes sense. But how do you
yeah,
keep that feeling and that philosophy into the company building as well?
yeah. So that's a very interesting question. I always used to think that these two things are very, very different. Running a startup and doing surgeries is very, very different. But if you look at the very fabric which we have built at Fitterfly, it's outcome. Now, the outcome at Fitterfly for me means that can I change the future? Can I change the future at a mass scale? If you look at problems like diabetes, heart disease, PCOS, obesity, all of them, whatever we have done that has not worked. Whatever we've done in terms of more doctors, blood tests, tablets, nothing has worked. So the whole theory was, can we change the future at a mass scale? But what I'm trying to do in my surgical practice is change one life at a time.
Yeah.
And again, it is very heavily oriented towards an outcome, especially the conditions which I treat, say in a 1 or 2 year old child. It's going to have an impact over the next 70 to 80 years on that single person's lifetime. and maybe with the 5 10 people he or she is intimately connected with. So once I understood that anatomy of an outcome is the binding glue, whether I'm doing my surgical practice where I'm maybe impacting about 5 children a week, 6 children a week, versus building something at Fitterfly where I go every morning, is the scale progressing from 100 to 200 to 1000 to 1 million? Can I see that happening in the next 10, 15 years? I think that single binding glue of clinical proof and outcomes is what keeps on impacting and what keeps on driving me at least. And I think that's a common thread there.
What enables the scale?
So the scale, the primary enabler is, I think, the product market fit, that you have built a product which people will engage with, and that can be launched as a product at scale through various distribution channels
Mm-hmm.
at the right price, and then people are referring other people to it. In healthcare, the scale is always built by the power of referrals, and referrals are a function of two things. One is the customer experience. How did they feel when they were using your product? And second is, did they move from point A to B? What was the promise you made to them? Did
Right.
you fulfill that promise?
Yeah.
So I think right now the main lever for us at this stage is just marketing, branding, and going out and meeting people. But we are seeing that overall, in 1 or 2 years, the main lever would be the power of referrals and people talking about it and sending other people directly to us.
My grandfather died at a very young age of diabetes. And even today, like I worry about it for myself, right? Because it's apparently, and I could be wrong here, I've been told it's genetically passed on, right? But nobody else in my family has it yet or has identified it yet. But maybe if you can just educate me a little bit about metabolic health in India as an issue or as a thing, just so I can get a sense for how big of a problem that is that you're trying to solve.
So if we take our discussion to a more philosophical level, I think
Please.
India, yeah. So India in general has been a race, which has been a little bit lower on the calorie side for so long, for so many centuries, if you
Okay.
look back. And now we've got abundance of grains and carbohydrates and all those, and more society has become mechanized with less physical labor and
Right.
more of I say mental labor. So both these coordinates, when you look at the kind of dietary choices which the present generation is making at scale, and the physical exercise, the weight is decreasing, and the rush lifestyle which we live, all these three things has led to a complete overpowering of the metabolic health in Indians. So we are overfed, we are exercising less, and we are working really hard every day, which is not a physical labor. So when you combine all these three together, then it leads to a lot of derangement of metabolism. And Indians have a higher genetic risk of diabetes. And on top of that, compounding this environmental risk, which is there because of these three factors. In India, currently, there are about 80 million people with diabetes,
Okay.
and there are another 120 million who are in a stage of pre-diabetes, which means that their HbA1c and fasting blood sugars are a little high, and 15 to 20% of these people with pre-diabetes are going to progress to diabetes every year, and about 60-70% of them will add to the diabetes burden within the next 7 to 10 years.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at close to 140, 150 million people with diabetes by 2030. And this is a huge burden. And if you consider that India always promises that we have a young and growing population and we'll reap the demographic dividend.
Right.
But imagine a part of that demographic dividend is going to be standing in queues in clinics and buying medication or spending time in clinics or dealing with the complications of diabetes. It's going to be a promise which is going to go unfulfilled until unless we do something at scale for it.
Right. So, and that's the genesis of this idea, I believe. But how do you fix this? Because this, if I had said to you, if I'd just given you these three things, like overfed, exercises less, and works too hard, I guess two out of those three would apply to the United States. The work too hard thing, I'm not too sure of, but definitely overfed and exercising less. How do you disintermediate these problems with technology, right? Because that's how you get to scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
So a disclosure, I was actually the first patient on this platform, and the whole testing and everything has been done on me. So till 2019 at Fitterfly, we were just building nutrition databases because we understood that nutrition forms the basis of a lot of healthcare conditions. So we built a database to understand if a person is eating a meal and it has four recipes in it, what does it mean in terms of carbohydrate, protein, fat, fiber, micronutrients? And we
Yeah.
did it at scale, like for millions of people. And then I was diagnosed to a pre-diabetes. My dad has struggled with diabetes. I lost two first cousins because of diabetes,
Sorry.
nephropathy, and then kidney failure and all those things. So I was very worried. I was what 44 at that time, and I was really worried that was
Yeah.
going to happen to me. So what we did was we paired the data from the continuous glucose monitoring devices along with the food which I was eating, and the data was startling. I thought I was eating healthy, I thought I was exercising, but certain foods were triggering a higher blood sugar rise in me than the other foods. And the foods which I thought healthy turned out to be not healthy. And certain combinations of foods, certain combinations of exercises, certain times of the day, there were fluctuations which were not good for me.
So I just wanted to jump in here for a second, right? Because in a way, I'm really envious that you had the ability to understand how to test that. I feel like I'm self-testing my food and my nutrition every day, and I don't feel like I have any way to understand whether I'm doing the right thing or not. I really mean that. At the beginning of 2000, it's hard for me to remember the years anymore. 22? Yeah, at the beginning of 2022, I weighed 81 and a half kilos. And I'm only 5'7".
Wow.
Yeah, I weighed 81 and a half kilos. That's like a middleweight boxer. Like that's a heavy person. And so I woke up one day, I stepped on the scale. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I didn't really know what to do though. I mean, I was probably drinking too much. So fair enough. I think the pandemic did that to a lot of people, right? Because you were stuck inside the whole time. But I woke up and I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. So I stopped doing that. And I started eating healthy, or at least I thought so. And this is why I'm asking you this question. I now weigh 67 kilos, so I'm fine now. I weigh what I weighed in high school. So I took care of that, the weight part of it. But I'm still not sure about these food combinations at all. Like, how is a normal person supposed to figure out what eating healthy is? Because you get so many of these weird signals from, I'll say, the market to tell you what is and isn't healthy. So the only thing I've really tried to do is stop eating processed food, and stop eating out so much. But otherwise, I don't know. Like I think I eat well, but I don't know. How should I know?
Yeah. So I think we'll have to divide the problem into two parts. So one is for a person who does not have diabetes, heart disease,
Yep.
pre-diabetes, PCOS, because then we are going into domain where the second hit has already happened. So one hit is the genetics,
Yep.
second hit is the environment. But if you're talking about people like you who do not have diabetes, just want to lose weight and be healthy, be fit, I think the basic fundamental to follow is what you already said. One is, don't eat anything processed.
Yeah, I
Cut
don't.
it out. Like we don't realize even simple ketchups
Yeah, I won't.
or
Won't.
even soda and
Yep.
all these things, or even accompaniments or some starters along with drinks. They all have kind of chemicals which are going to bloat us up.
Right.
So the single most important thing is processed food. And the second thing is the eating times of the day. Like a lot of people I know, they eat very late into the night, and then they sleep immediately afterwards. And the third, so just managing those times of the day. And for people who are healthy, I think intermittent fasting at least couple of times a week, and also exercising while fasting
Yeah,
is
every
an
day.
important way to, yeah. So it's an important way to push your metabolism. And the third thing is pairing it with exercise. A lot of people, what I've observed, at least in at Butterfly, is the moment you go for a walk post meal, it really helps you lower it down your glycemic excursion and also the resultant weight loss. The recent research is showing that the foods which cause a high glucose rise, even in normal people, are the same foods which lead to fat deposition because excess glucose gets converted into fat.
Yeah.
So it's very important to lower your glycemic variability by going for a walk post any exercise, post any meal,
Right.
whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, if you go for a walk. And the fourth thing which you can do is just understand the macronutrients in your diet in terms of, are you having enough fiber? Are you having enough calories? Are you having enough proteins? Just the overall distribution of the meals to keep the carbohydrates not more than 50% for sure throughout the day.
Yeah.
A lot of people are eating 60-70% carbs. So if you even follow these basic 4-5 principles for a person who does not have diabetes, PCOS, heart disease, it's good enough.
I feel like I'm doing all that now. It's so strange. I intermittent fast, and of course I exercise every day. Otherwise, I couldn't have lost all that weight. And it made a real impact on me in a way that was super surprising. But I also
Mhm.
think that, and I know we read a lot about this, but I'd love to hear your opinion on this too. I found that when I was able to have the discipline to run every day and lift weights like 2 or 3 times a week and then do the intermittent fasting, so not eat after 8 o'clock and not eat before like 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, kind of as a religion, right? That my work
Yeah,
actually benefited. That, in other words, that the stuff that I learned from doing that actually benefited the work that I was doing as well. And my business actually got much better during that time period. Is that really connected? I'm not kidding either. I see you're smiling at me, but is that really connected?
it is connected. So the kind of discipline which you follow when you regulate your own life does reflect into everything else which you do.
I feel like it.
Like for me, yeah. So for the last 7 years, running a startup has not been easy. It's
Yeah.
come with a lot of stress, of managing people, managing investors, raising funds, building business. But the only thing which has kept me going is we very particular about being in the gym at 6:30 in the morning,
Yeah.
come rain or sunshine, funding, no funding, employees or customers, sending bad letters, but
Yeah.
just making sure that I'm in the gym at 6:30 in the morning. Uh, is the secret sauce, and then eating on time and sleeping early and having those 6 7 hours of sleep is the key thing which lets me do everything else. So you're doing the right thing, Michael. You're on the right track.
I'm trying. I'm trying. I feel a little bit lucky too, though. And I'll tell you another story. When I moved to Japan when I was 24 and a half years old, all of my buddies at Morgan Stanley joined a gym, and it was a benefit that the firm gave us. I'd never been in a gym. I didn't know what a gym was. And back then, the only experience I had with like weightlifting was watching Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Honestly, that's the only thing I knew. And it didn't relate to me at all. But doing that, starting that when I was 25 years old means that now when I do it, my body is used to it. So I just feel super fortunate for that as well. But I do think that that discipline builds something into you, this idea of like, I can do it. I know it sounds really trite, but I think if you keep doing that stuff and you keep seeing, you talked about outcomes at the beginning, right? So when I went from 81 and a half to 67, the outcome was so obvious. And then I thought to myself, how can I apply all of that to everything else that I do in a way that outcomes are there? And, you mentioned the stress when you're building a startup. Part of the stress comes from people around you telling you, oh, that's never going to work. Do you know what I mean? Have you
Yeah,
have you had that? And if you have had that, how do you maintain this idea of it might not work, but I'm just going to keep going and build this thing anyway?
yeah. That's a wonderful question, Michael. And as a surgeon, when I was setting up my first telemedicine startup in 2011, 2012,
Yep.
all the other surgeons, they were laughing at me. I said, "You're a great surgeon. Why are you taking the risk? You can earn so well." My dad has always done a government job. So when I passed out of AIMS, there were so many jobs available. He says, "Oh, why can't you get a fixed job? Why are you doing this?" So resistance from family, resistance from co-workers, other surgeons. And frankly, my first startup didn't do very well. And we got acquired, but we didn't do very well. And everybody was again, "Oh, we told you it won't work."
Right.
And here I'm again. And here I'm again, running the second startup. But what I realized is something which I heard from Elon Musk, but that's a statement which really resonated with me. If it is really something important, you're gonna do nonetheless. You should do it, even
Yeah.
if there's a high chance of you failing in it. And I could see that it is important for me personally because my pre-diabetes completely reversed and I'm healthier than ever.
Yeah.
For the last 4 years, my blood sugars have remained normal. So I know that by doing this, it has impacted me just the way your lifestyle has impacted you.
Yeah.
And if I can build a technology which can help millions of people like me, we can change the trend of diabetes and health forever. And that's such an exciting prospect.
Yeah.
If somebody tells me today that you have 95% chance of failing, only 5% chance of succeeding, I will look, wow, I'm going to do this. But if somebody tells me there's only 1% chance of succeeding, 99% chance of failing, I've said, I'm going to try harder. Let's
Yeah,
do it.
exactly.
So
Exactly. I'm gonna do it even more, right?
I do it even more. I mean, I'll have to work 5 times harder. That's all.
Yeah. And that's really, it's funny because it's actually mathematically true, right? 5 times harder. It's not like 50 times harder. How do you conquer this fear thing, right? Because just because you're succeeding, and you said this actually with your first startup, like, you got acquired, but it didn't do as well as you wanted it to do. And then you went back to it and your family came back around and said, we told you this the first time. And you didn't
Yeah.
listen that time either. I mean, at some level, I always say to people that are repeating themselves to me, like, you know who I am. You know I'm not going to give up. Why are you telling me this? Like, it's on you, not on me now this time.
Yeah.
Right? But how do you deal with that fear of failure? I really mean that, right? Because I wake up with it every day. And, I told you before when we first got on the call something great happened to me today. And it'll probably last until the end of today. And when I wake up tomorrow, I'll be like, nothing great happened. What did I do wrong? Do you have that feeling?
Yeah, I have that feeling all the time. So I think what really helped me get through the fear of failure was realizing that after the age of 40, everything is a bonus. You know, when I
Yeah,
was growing as a small child in a small town where nobody has gone beyond Chandigarh, you know, Delhi was a distant dream and Bombay and US was never heard of. I thought that at the age of 40, I'll have a small hospital in my hometown where I'll be earning X amount of money and have a
right,
social standing. When I look back at that time when I was my first startup was not doing well, I said, "Oh, this is a bonus. I'm already a very skilled surgeon.
right.
I have done lots of surgeries and I'm earning well. What's the worst that can happen is that I lose all my money and time which I've invested,
Yeah,
but I'll be a fundamentally different person." And the biggest support which I found, Michael, was my wife. You
yeah,
know, there was a time in 2017 when we needed to put in about 50 lakhs of money, which is about how much? 50 lakhs is about $100,000.
yeah. It's real money.
So we wanted to put in that kind of money, and that's all the money I had. And I had loans on the car, loans on the house, and that's the only money I had. And we had to hire three full-time engineers. So I went to my wife in 2017. I said, you know, we are not gonna make progress if these three engineers are not hired full time,
Right,
and they need an employment guarantee for at least next 1 year.
right,
So she said, "What's stopping you?" I said, "This is the only money we have. Either we can pay off part of our loans and have some, savings for the rainy day, or I put this all into Fit of Life." So she said, "Go and put it into Fit of Life. What's stopping you? You can always earn as a surgeon. We can cut down our lifestyle. We can go and stay with family. This is the only chance which you get. At least you have a clear path and a choice. A lot of people don't even have anything to do at this stage in their lives." So such three or four times these decision points came, and my wife was always like, "Go for it," while my parents said, "Don't go for it." So
but it's 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 a great way to show this idea that like the partners that you choose, whether they're your legal partners, meaning your wife or your children or your business partners, it's easy to be with someone when it's easy. It's not easy to be with someone when it's hard, when things get hard. And for those people that have experienced that in life, it's always nice to look around. And at the end of the day, you really only have like four people in the world that care about you. And if they're
yeah,
around you, I really mean this very seriously. If they're around you when things go bad, I mean, hopefully you never need them, right? You don't never need to lean. But when you do need to lean, if they're there, if they're not running away when things are going poorly, you're surrounding yourself with the right people.
yeah.
But this is also like when you meet new people, I always struggle with this thing that I call the fallacy of now, right? So when people meet you today, they don't know that you grew up in a small town. They don't know that your father was a teacher or working for the government. They don't know what they don't know what your overall family expectations were of you. And yet they always presume you are the successful, I'm just going to throw in wealthy, we can argue whether that's the case or not, person that you are today. They don't understand the back struggle. And that's why I love to have these conversations with entrepreneurs and frankly with people because the fallacy of now is a fallacy. You weren't always here. And all of the things that successful people deal with, or just people that are pushing really hard, are the same things that everybody else is dealing with, but they just don't know that.
But here's my counterpoint to that. Why do we want them to know? Towards what purpose? Are we seeking acclaim? Are we seeking some kind of justification? Doesn't matter.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely, actually. I don't care. And as a matter of fact, the older that I've gotten, the less I care about it because there's a bunch of fallacies about me. I mean, there are tons
Yeah,
of them actually about who I am and what I've done and what I'm building and all this other stuff. And they just kind of roll off. They roll
yeah,
off. The interesting thing to me is not about the way it makes me feel at all because I don't care at all. And I would
yeah.
presume the same for you. What's interesting to me is the fact that people think that how does it impact the other parts of their life if they're willing to put that fallacy as fact, right?
Hmm.
And then the other thing that it also means to me is that, you said before, 100 startups get built, five of them actually survive, and maybe one of them is actually super successful. And I'm curious what you
Yeah.
think about this because you brought it up. I would submit to you that 95 of them shouldn't have been started in the first place.
You are so right. You know, when my first startup didn't do well, I realized that our metric for success, because it's the first time startup from a non-business family, from a non-business background, The first metric of success was, oh, we built this. And the second metric of success was, oh, we got news coverage.
Right,
The
right,
third metric of success was, oh, somebody has given us money.
right.
All three were useless metrics,
None of it matters.
and none of it matters. And so actually, I grew so allergic to PR. In this startup, we started our PR just last year. We did zero PR for the first 5, 6 years. I didn't want to speak to press. And I said, there is, till I'm sure that this is working in terms of one is unit economics in certain way that people are actually willing to pay for it.
Right.
And secondly, the clinical outcomes. I don't want to even talk about it. So you're right. If you look at the anatomy of failure of startups, 42% of the startups fail because founders build something which nobody wanted.
Right.
That's the biggest reason why a startup fails.
Yeah, yeah. But it's funny that you say that too, because a lot of the noise you hear around it is they fail because there's not enough money. Nobody invested in them at all. And I'm like, that's really no way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of the most successful companies I've seen get built were built with no money at all. And I've seen it in multi-generations as well. I'm not talking about just today. One of my dad's friends was broke, and I mean dead broke, like couldn't afford food broke. And in a way, he was kind of like you. I'm not kidding. I was in his house. It was terrible. But he kept doing this thing that he loved doing. And I'll qualify that in a second because that sounds a little bit like noise. He was very committed to the fact that electronics were going to change the way people live their lives. And he had to wait for the market to catch up to him. This is in the 1970s. And he finally found a product that everybody wanted. And as soon as he found that product, he didn't know what to do with all of the demand that he had.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it wasn't like, because a lot of people say like, follow your passion, the money will follow. This is complete garbage. But I have another philosophy on this too, and I'm curious what you think about it. Anybody up here can be good at almost anything if they try hard enough. But they can't be great at it unless they care about it, right? And that was actually one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you and find out why you cared. Because you don't enter a business like this to make money per se. You enter because you care. And the greatness illuminates itself inside that business through the caring. It turns into success maybe, depending on how you measure it. But you could never do this if you didn't care. Is that a fair thought as well?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair thing to say. When I look at other spaces, which like my wife did an MBA and she could have done anything after Stanford.
Yep.
She came back to healthcare because she really cares about clinical outcomes. She really cares about making a difference. And it's the lowest paying industry when you start as an entrepreneur. It doesn't scale up as fast as some of the other industries do. But still, people in healthcare think differently and they really care about it. So I'm in here for a personal impact. I'm at a stage where I no longer need money. I'll always have more of money, but less of time.
Yep.
So time is the only currency I've got left. And so I want to invest it meaningfully for the future. So you're right. So I really care about this. And most of the entrepreneurs who have been in a startup for more than 3 or 4 years, they would be there only if they really care about what they're doing. Otherwise, they would not last beyond 3, 4 years.
Yeah, I agree. I have so many other things that I want to ask you, but I want to leave people with that thought. I want to thank you for doing this today, for taking the time to come and do it. Dr. Arbinder Singal, a co-founder and the CEO at Fitt. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
I think it's a very different kind of show, Michael. You made me talk about things which I generally do not talk. So thanks very much for asking those questions.
Thank you.